So I'm starting to notice a little pattern with some of our female poets, including Miss Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath. I'm noticing that they both have a thing for stealing from nature. Let's go find out what Miss Sylvia Plath has been stealing. Good morning and welcome to Lost for Words, where we explore great women poets. I am Sarah Woods, and today we are continuing our journey exploring the beautiful and lovely Miss Sylvia Plath. I'm kind of excited today because I feel like I've noticed something that Sylvia Plath and Emily Dickinson have in common, and that is for stealing from nature. I don't know if you remember or if you watched it, but I have a video where I did a review of Emily Dickinson's poem. I think it's called I Robbed the Woods, and it's one of my favorite poems of hers because it just has such a mischievousness to it. And so Sylvia Plath has a poem about stealing from nature also. She is stealing from a public garden. And so I think we're gonna have a lot of fun today reading this. This poem is called Fable of the Rhododendron Stealers, and it is number 85 in the collected poems of Sylvia Plath. If you would like to read with me, I will also put the full poem in the description beneath the video. I think there's like a little arrow you can press and it'll bring it down, and you can read along there too if you'd like. Okay, so let's get started.
I walked the unwalked garden of rose beds in the public park. At home felt the want of a single rose present to imagine the garden's remainder in full paint. The stone lion head set in the wall let drop its spittle of sluggish green into the stone basin. I snipped an orange bud, pocketed it. When it had opened its orange in my vase, retrogressed to blowze, I next chose red, argued my conscience clear, which robbed the park of less red than withering did. Musk satisfied my nose, red my eye, the petals nap my fingertips. I considered the poetry I rescued from blind air, from complete eclipse. Yet today, a yellow bud in my hand, I stalled at sudden noisy crashes. From the laurel thicket, no one approached. A spasm took the rhododendron bushes. 3 girls, engrossed, were wrenching full clusters of cerise and pink from the rhododendron, mountaining them on spread newspaper. They brassily picked, slowed by no chagrin, and wouldn't pause for my straight look, but gave me pause, my rose a charge. Whether nicety stood confounded by love or petty thievery by large.
Okay. I think another reason I like this poem of Sylvia Plath, because I feel like a lot of the poems that she gets attention for are much darker in a different way. Like the poem Daddy, it's her issues with her father and her husband. Lady Lazarus, that one's very dark. And then I feel like because her life was ended so tragically and so early, there's for me, I feel like there's a tendency to want to gravitate towards her later poetry and see what it was she was writing, what she was writing before she took her life, and to see what was coming out of her during that season. And I have not studied or read all of her poetry, but I feel like sometimes when I read her poems, there is something about them that is, imagine you know, a human being, we have eyes and we have a certain way of looking at the world. And so imagine, I feel like you've met these people. They're the people that have the rose-colored glasses, and they sort of look at the world through this, like, everything is wonderful, everything's amazing, nothing seems to go wrong for them. They're able to find the rose-coloredness in everything. And so you kind of read their poetry, and it everything has like a slant towards like hope, beauty, goodness, miraculous, and which is amazing. Sometimes I feel like it can be a little bit annoying if it's not, if it completely denies reality. But it is like, it can be refreshing and uplifting to read or experience art through that lens. But then you might have another person who's able to see that. They're able to see the miraculous, the beautiful, like the good in life, but they also are aware of the pain and the terribleness, and the like devastation that happens in life. And that person probably is more of like, I would say like a realist. Like they're able to experience a wider spectrum and communicate a wider spectrum of life. But then you have the person who I feel like has on glasses that are like dark shaded, if that makes any sense. And so it's like they look around at the world and everything has like a darker spin, a negative spin, a more hopeless spin, or perspective, or way of seeing. And for me, sometimes when I pick up Sylvia Plath's poetry and I just randomly start picking poems, that is how her poetry feels to me sometimes. I'll read it and it's like she is looking at things. So I keep getting this word in my head, like for a feeling. Imagine like a tin can, and like a hollow tin can, and like hitting it. Like imagine that sound. I feel like sometimes reading her poetry has that sound to me. Like I don't know if that makes any sense at all to you. Like let me just pick a random poem, and I'm gonna do this right now. This has nothing to do with what I was gonna do today, but okay, here's I'm just picking one little phrase from this. It says, I didn't call you at all. Nevertheless, you steam to me over the sea, fat and red, a placenta. Fat and red, a placenta, paralyzing the kicking lovers. Like, there is something about that. Okay, that's one. I'm gonna pick another one. I am packing the hard potatoes like good clothes. I am packing the babies. I am packing the sick cats. Oh, vase of acid. Okay, I'm randomly picking random words from random poems. People and cows. The Lionians had always thought heaven would be something else. But with the same faces, the same places, it was not a shock. Cut. What a thrill, my thumb instead of an onion, the top quite gone, except for a sort of hinge of skin. I'm just gonna skip around. Imagine the world fisted to a fetus head, ravined, seamed with suffering from conception upwards, and there you have it in a hand, grit in the eye or a sore, Okay, I'm gonna pick another one. The moon man stands in his shell, bent under a bundle of sticks. The light falls chalk and cold upon our bedspread. His teeth are chattering among the leprous. Okay, I'm gonna pick another one. Although I admit I desire occasionally some backtalk from the mute sky, I can't honestly complain. A certain minor light may still lean incandescent out of the kitchen table or chair, as if a celestial burning took possession of the most obtuse objects now and then. Here's one, okay. Of sorts, miracles occur, if you care to call those spasmodic tricks of radiance miracles. The wait's begun again, the long wait for the angel, for the rare, random descent. Born green we were in this flawed garden, but in speckled thickets, warted as a toad, spitefully skulks our warden, fixing his snare. Okay, so I just went through, like, these were not underlined, like I literally just went through her book of poetry and like picked random like little stanzas and read them to you. And it was very easy to find stanzas that were that had this sense of, like, to me, of like drained lifelessness, hopelessness, like that hollow, like a ringing of a hollow tin can. Like that is the like sound that her poetry sometimes makes me think of. I don't know if you ever do that with art or poetry. Like if when you read it, if it stirs in you like some kind of music. I guess I'm just saying when I read her poetry, that is the feeling that I get. It's something very jarring and alarming, and that makes me feel like I'm gaining her perspective, but it's almost like I wouldn't want to stay in this perspective for too long. Like it doesn't feel good to me. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on how you feel when you read her poetry. I'm almost positive, like if you've ever experienced depression or despair or hopelessness, and I know personally I've experienced that in different seasons of my life. So I know there's a sense of like you could read her poetry at certain seasons of your life and be like, oh wow, I'm not alone, this is how I feel, or I can relate to this. But you could also read her poetry in a more hopeful season of your life, when you have a lot of joy and a lot of hope and a lot of like, it would be very odd to read her poetry. It would feel like reading another language, sort of, or it would be like walking through mud, sort of. It would feel very difficult to walk through if you were in one of those kind of seasons trying to read her poetry. Anyway, I don't know why I went down this long rabbit path. So sorry. But I guess I'm allowed to. Guess I can do what I want. Okay, so let's just jump right into this poem. This is called The Fable of the Rhododendron Stealers. So right off the bat, our title is giving us quite a bit of information, which is important for like setting this poem up. So a fable it's a short story where the characters are usually animals, and usually these stories are used as a way to teach a moral, and so Sylvia Plath is right away, she's telling us that this poem that she's about to give us is a fable. So she is it should be a story that has animals, and it should be something that leaves us with a moral, that teaches us about a moral. And so it's called Fable of the Rhododendron Stealers. Rhododendrons are these beautiful shrubs that they're evergreen, and I feel like their leaves, I don't know, they're about ish, and they have like these beautiful fluffy pink flowers on them. I love them, and I think they grow a lot of times like in the mountains, in shady places. They're beautiful. But this is a fable of the rhododendron stealers. So right off the bat, we know we're about to read a poem where there's some stealing being done. So in our Emily Dickinson exploration, she was stealing from the woods. Now we have Sylvia Plath. So she has walked into, not the woods like Emily Dickinson, but a garden. And she starts to describe this garden, and she says that it is a garden of rose beds. So she conjures in our imagination a public park with gardens of rose beds. And she says, I walked the unwalked garden of rose beds in the public park. So for me, the way she's describing this, I start to imagine this public park with these beautiful garden beds with roses in them. And because she describes it as unwalked, for me, that makes me feel like these roses are not appreciated. But she has gone there and she's going to appreciate them. So she says, at home she felt the want of a single rose, present to imagine the garden's remainder in full paint. So while she was sitting at home, she started to have this longing for a single rose. And she's like, okay, if I could get one single rose, then it would sit, on my counter, beside my bed, in my window, wherever she would put it. And it would make me think of the full garden and all its colors and all its beauty. And so she wants a rose in her home to trigger her imagination and the beauty of those garden rose beds in that park. So she says she walked the unwalked garden of rose beds. So we know she makes her way to the garden, to the rose beds. And then she starts to describe them. And she says, the stone lion head set in the wall, let drop its spittle of sluggish green. So for me, I imagine she's there and there's like a stone wall with a lion's head in a fountain, and you can see have you ever seen like a fountain where the water's like not pouring out, but it's like a sluggish, like you can see like the algae sort of that's made its home in the water. So it's not clean water that's pouring out of this lion's mouth. So I imagine, because she decided to describe this lion as a part of the fountain, for me, when I read it, it makes me think of like this little guard, like a guard of the rose garden, like he's there to protect it. I feel like this poem is actually a lot of Sylvia Plath's poems for me, I feel like I see them in black and white almost, like darker shades, and a lot of times I'll be reading them and then all of a sudden she'll throw a color in there and it's like very jarring. Bam, here's yellow, bam, here's orange, bam, here's pink, bam, here's red. It's not like reading something about nature where everything has color. I don't know if that makes any sense. But that's just like a little window into my imagination when I'm reading Sylvia Plath. So when I start this poem, for me, it starts off darker, more muted, more black and white, gray. And then we get the lion with the sluggish green spittle coming out of its fountain mouth. Suddenly we have Sylvia Plath, and she has snipped an orange bud and pocketed it. So then she takes this vase, she takes this rose home, and it says, when it had opened its orange in my vase, retrogressed to blowze. I don't know if this is the word blowze, blowze. I'm not sure how you say that word. I looked it up. Retrogressed means to go back to a former state, a less better off state. And blowze means a beggar wench, an untidy woman, or a wild girl. So when this orange rose had returned to a less ideal state of a beggar wench or a wild girl, she next chose red. So we have this orange rose that she has plucked, brought home, and so as it wilts and dies, as it returns to this untidy woman, this wild girl, this beggar wench, it has died basically, she next chose red. So now we have Sylvia Plath, and she has wandered back to the garden, and she says, I next chose red, argued my conscience clear, which robbed the park of less red than withering did. So now she's returned to the rose gardens, and she's robbed a red rose, and she is trying to convince herself, like to tell her conscience that what she did was okay. And so she's saying, well, the roses are going to wither there anyway. I only took one, and that I robbed less red from the garden than withering takes on a daily basis of these roses. She's brought up the word conscience. And so obviously her conscience must be a little bit conflicted about taking these roses, but she is, she's convincing herself and her conscience that even death, even withering, steals more color from the garden than what she's taking. So she's only taking one rose. So then she says, Musk satisfied my nose, red my eye, the petals nap my fingertips. I considered the poetry I rescued from blind air, from complete eclipse. So this little section, she is now letting us feel her appreciate these roses that she has stolen. She said, Musk satisfied my nose. So she's enjoying the smell, like the red, what it does to her eye, what the petals do to her fingertips. She said, I considered the poetry I rescued from blind air, from complete eclipse. So right here, I feel like we're reminded of the beginning of the poem where she says she walked the unwalked garden. And it makes me think that like she feels like she's the only one appreciating these roses. And in fact, by taking one home and appreciating it and loving it and enjoying it, she is in fact rescuing it, is what it feels like she believes that she's doing. She said, I rescued from blind air, from complete eclipse. So I was not able to find anything analyzing this poem, so I'm doing this all from my head, which is lovely for you guys. So hopefully I'm not just destroying this with my ideas. But for me, this makes me think that because she says from blind air, from complete eclipse, you end up not being able to see the thing that's there. She is rescuing these roses from being unseen. So she feels like, she must feel like part of a flower's value is in being seen, these roses, and that's part of their joy is to be seen. And so she feels like she is these little roses that she brings home, and she's rescued them from blind air, from complete eclipse. She's rescued them from being unseen and unappreciated. Yet today, a yellow bud in my hand. So we are back at the garden. Sylvia Plath, back for another rose. She has still an orange one, a red one, and now she has a yellow one. She has it in her hand. She stalls at sudden noisy crashes. So you imagine this garden of roses, and so you think of like a peaceful, lovely place, and Sylvia Plath is the only one appreciating it, the only one there, and she's walking, and all of a sudden there's this ruckus, there's this noise, and it says, I stalled at sudden noisy crashes from the laurel thicket. So you imagine Sylvia Plath hearing all this noise, and it's covered by a laurel thicket, and she's like trying to see like, what is this noise coming from? No one approached. This is my favorite part. It says a spasm took the rhododendron bushes. So then you imagine these big rhododendron bushes with their beautiful pink flowers, the fluffy little balls, and you imagine it's still, and there's all this loud noise coming from it, and then all of a sudden it says a spasm took the rhododendron bushes. So all of a sudden it's like you imagine just this crazy shaking of the rhododendron bush. I love that word. And then it says 3 girls engrossed were wrenching full clusters of cerise and pink from the rhododendron, mountaining them on spread newspaper. They brassily picked, slowed by no chagrin. I don't know how you say that word. Chagrin. And wouldn't pause for my straight look. So there she is staring at them, and this spasm that overtook the rhododendron, it turns out to be 3 girls who are like completely engrossed in like tearing, wrenching big clusters of these beautiful pink rhododendrons from the bush and piling them on top of this newspaper that they've got on the ground. So they're creating like a mountain out of these beautiful pink flowers. And it says they brassily picked, slowed by no chagrin. I had to look up that word. It's not a word I use. And so brassily means loud, harsh, jarring. So they just grabbed and jarred and picked, and like it wasn't delicate picking that was going on here. And okay, so she's sitting there staring at them, and they don't stop out of distress or humiliation just because she sees them. So they don't have, I guess the thing you see in this little picture is that Sylvia Plath, as she goes to the garden each time and she picks one rose, and she has to like talk to her conscience and convince it that she's doing something good, and that withering does worse to the roses than what she's doing by taking one rose. She's having to convince her conscience that it's okay to take one rose, and she stumbles upon these 3 girls who are like just like ravaging these bushes, just, you know, no delicateness, no politeness, just like ripping these rhododendrons off the bushes and making this big mountain pile of rhododendrons. And you have to imagine Sylvia Plath like, what the heck? I'm over here trying to be all nice and be like polite and delicate and not destroy these gardens. And here are these little girls who are just helping themselves to their heart's delight without any shame at all. I love that. And it says, they wouldn't pause for her stare or her look, but it says, but gave me pause, my rose a charge, whether nicety stood confounded by love or petty thievery by large. So you have Sylvia Plath, and it's almost like she's standing there. It says whether nicety stood confounded by love. Nicety, I think they're using that word, like, I think they're using that word in the sense of like polite social behavior. So like there's Sylvia Plath standing there all polite and nice and trying to have a good conscience about what she's doing. And she's standing there confounded. She's like shocked, confused, surprised. She's shocked, confused, and surprised by these girls. And she's surprised and confused. And it's either, and she can't tell whether the thing that is surprising her is their love for the flowers or their petty thievery, that she can't, it's like she's looking at them and she's trying to decide, are these girls, is what I'm seeing here just an insane love of these flowers, and so they're just helping themselves, or is it just they have no respect for the flowers and they're just petty little thieves? They're petty thieves just doing, you know, whatever they want. So if this is a fable, then the animals, I believe, are Sylvia Plath and the three girls. Because usually fables are about animals. They're not about, they don't use people. And so she's trying to teach us a moral, or she's trying to share some kind of moral from this poem. I don't know if I know what the moral is. I feel like I should, but I feel like, so obviously the moral has something to do with stealing flowers. And we have Sylvia Plath on one hand, who tries to be nice and polite and take one at a time so that she doesn't disturb the overall sense of the garden, but she wants to make sure that the flowers are appreciated and looked at and loved and enjoyed and thought about. And then she encounters these little girls, and they're just taking all the flowers that they want. They're piling up a mountain of them, as much as they want. And you almost get the feeling that like she admires them maybe, or like she's shocked, but there's some part of her that is like, sees these little girls doing what she would like, she wishes she could do. Maybe not quite the same, but like in the same manner as violently. But I bet you Sylvia Plath, if her conscience would allow her to, that she would go in and pick bouquets of roses to go home and enjoy. That she wouldn't just be picking one rose. That if she did what the delight of her heart let her do, she wouldn't be being so polite and nice. I mean, when I read it, it almost makes me think, well, does it matter either way? If no one is appreciating them except for Sylvia Plath and these three little girls, then they should do what they want. I don't know. That's probably not the moral of the story. I don't know what the moral of the story is. So I guess if you guys would read this poem, I would love to hear what you think is the moral of this poem. Like, what is the moral we're supposed to learn? Is it when you're picking flowers from an ignored garden, you should just pick as much as you want because nobody's gonna care? Or is it, I feel like it's like it's this feeling of like who's better off, like Sylvia Plath with a conscience trying to talk herself into it being okay, or these little girls who have no conscience and are just doing what they want. It's a fascinating thing, two fascinating feelings to push together and like try to let them exist side by side, because they don't exist very well beside each other. I guess it kind of makes you think like there are all these adults walking around like being polite and nice, but really on the inside they have this inner child that really wants to do what these three little girls were doing. I don't know. I'm not sure what her moral is. The thing it leaves me with is like, if you had to choose between the two, would you choose the girl who's only taking one rose, who's having to convince herself all the time that what she's doing is okay, or the girls who are like tearing apart the rose bush or tearing apart the bushes to get the flowers without any respect and don't have any bad conscience about it? Like, what's better, you know?
I think for me, the thing that this poem leaves me with more than a moral is a sense of Sylvia Plath's need for beauty and her craving of it, and contrasting that with contrasting her polite pursuit of beauty with these little girls' complete abandonment in their pursuit of these flowers. I feel like she lets us into a little picture of the desires of her heart, especially when you think about all of her poetry and the darker feeling that comes along with a lot of her poetry, that maybe inside of her was a real desire to let herself go in the enjoyment of beauty. And I also feel like this is a really interesting poem to do after the one that I just reviewed last week, Sylvia Plath's poem called Daddy, where she sort of has the voice of a little girl, and you get to feel her longings for her father in that poem. So this one, I almost feel like it has a similar feeling in it, that even though she's a grown woman, it's allowing us to see a desire inside of her that's almost little girl-like in its desire, her desire for the enjoyment of beauty and nature, and sort of wishing she didn't have to be so polite and self-controlled and always talking to her conscience, telling it and convincing it that it's doing the right thing. Really, in an ideal world, I imagine Sylvia Plath having her very own garden full of all of her favorite flowers, where she could go and truly indulge herself and see them whenever she wanted, and put them in vases whenever she wanted, without any feeling of guilt or having to convince herself that what she was doing is okay.
But anyway, we're gonna stop there. I hope you guys are having a great week, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.